Avery, whose show is this? Welcome, everybody, to your favorite day of the week. I'm Anthony Irwin, Senior Lakers Insider for Clutch Points, joined on this we're recording this on a Thursday, releasing this on a Friday. Thursdays aren't most people's favorite day of the week, but I am joined on this fine Thursday afternoon by Eric Steven of True Blue LA, my former colleague over there at SB Nation and at Vox. Eric, congratulations on the new labor agreement. That was great to see. I saw that y'all avoided going on strike. That was really good. And two, I guess we are covering the same ownership group now, so we have that to look forward to.
Yeah, we're sharing Mark Walter stories basically on today's episode. Unions are awesome. I'm always happy to get a deal done, and was very happy that we're still going over here. I will say, as a listener to your podcast, hearing the intro like recording live, I got thrown for a second. I'm like, wait, did he just say something? Nope, that's the tape. All right, like so, I fell right into it. Like, good times.
It's always funny to watch because I can see at the bottom of the screen people listening to the intro, and every single person, the first time that they do the show, always reacts to Avery saying "dad," like every single person without fail. It was honestly the smartest thing I've ever done. It makes this show so much more likable. It would be so much worse without her.
Your adorability factor is through the roof. It adds points to it. So you're right in that regard.
Today on the show, we are going to be talking about the sale. Still, that's the biggest story in my lifetime. Covering, not just covering the Lakers, but as a sports fan in Southern California growing up, this is the biggest day I think that I can really recall, other than Dr. Buss's passing, in terms of its ramifications here moving forward. Eric has been covering the Dodgers now for how long have you been covering the Dodgers?
Technically since 2009, but really full time since 2012.
And in that time, we had a brief overlap while I ran Dodgers Nation for like 15 minutes. And I have my share of my recollection of covering a Mark Walter and a Guggenheim team. But I do want to lean heavily on somebody who has more experience covering that team, just to prepare Laker fans for what might be coming. And I think it's really exciting, just based on my experience being a Dodgers fan, and comparing that to some of what it's been like to root for a mom and pop shop at times. But it might not all be upside. It might be it's an experience unto itself. If you had to just kind of elevator pitch off the bat from a 50,000 feet point of view, what it's like, or what Lakers fans should maybe anticipate rooting for a team owned by Mark Walter, owned by Guggenheim Sports, what would you kind of say to people?
So I want to preface this when they bought the team from Frank McCourt, who was universally loathed, literally brought the Dodgers into bankruptcy.
Yep.
Fans were like, boycotting is a strong word. They just weren't showing up in his latter few years running the team. So it really got into the doldrums. Like literally the commissioner got involved because they were screwing things up so badly.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say any owner would have they would have got the dead cat bounce, right? They would have been seen as like great just in comparison.
Yeah.
That said, even with that, like this current ownership group for the most part has been kind of what you want, from a fan base standpoint.
Yeah.
They have invested and not just pay, like what we could talk about. The payroll has been obviously astronomical, and there's no salary cap, but there is the luxury tax in baseball. They've been number one in that, but they've also done they've built up infrastructure and I think that's been sort of the key to like kind of everything this last what are they? This is their 13th full season. Teams in baseball view the Dodgers as like a model of like the actual or how the organization is run,
Mm.
um, just like top to bottom, talent, both on the field, behind the scenes, sort of how it's run, and like sort of combining a lot of not it's cliche to say like Moneyball. I don't want to like you know sort of discount it to
Play
that,
down. Yeah.
but like also with like spending the most as well, right? They like sort of a weaponized version of it in a way. Um, but yeah, it's been like I don't like they've kind of outside of a brief period in terms of spending, like even some of the like the gripes in terms of spending were like relative. Like they were under the luxury tax threshold a couple of years, like
Mm-hmm.
years, and like but they were also like right at the limit. They weren't like some of those McCourt years where they just kind of cratered and they weren't spending anything behind the scenes. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think it's been a like I like not everything's been great. Like and not some of that is not necessarily ownership driven, but like just some of the stuff they've like had to deal with in the ensuing like decade. But the I think overwhelmingly positive is probably how I would describe it.
I'm glad that you mentioned the McCourts off the top there because this isn't a situation like the Bus family is not as popular as they once were. And actually, one of the things that I was really marveling at over the course of the last 24 hours since the news dropped was the overwhelming celebratory nature of people receiving this news. That really kind of took me by surprise because I can distinctly remember watching on, Fox Sports West or whatever it was, Dr. Buss's, funeral ceremony and Magic Johnson telling Jeannie Buss, "Don't ever sell. You have the city's support forever. We're always going to be behind you." And then you fast forward to yesterday, and Magic Johnson's like, "Congrats on selling." It's like, but I do. It was really kind of wild because if you would have told me that the buses would ever sell, I would have told you, okay, well, that would be a mixed reception, right? But actually, no, it really wasn't. And now the McCourts were literally stealing money from the Dodgers, and um, people did not. There was nobody worried at all about saying the wrong thing
Yeah.
about that that ownership group on their way out the door. So I think it's been a little bit more balanced than that. But in this case, though, once again, the Guggenheim gets to step into a situation where there's such a clear path to pleasing Lakers fans. All I feel like people have been asking for is, hey, modernize your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Like spend on stuff that isn't controlled by the cap. You have the Rob Pelinka called KCP Mana from Heaven. That's their cable deal, is Mana from Heaven. It's
Mm-hmm.
this thing that keeps the lights on forever in perpetuity in ways that like other teams would give their right arms for. And yet it doesn't often feel like that is reinvested back into the organization. That's a criticism that I feel like Dodgers fans can never levy against Guggenheim since they have stepped in. At every turn, I feel like while I've been paying attention to them, it's been almost I don't think there's a such thing as overspending on infrastructure, but it's been pretty overwhelming what they have done to just completely revitalized what was a pretty broken down organization when they took over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like it's sort of a dual process of like building the infrastructure um, from the get go to establish the long term, but also immediately spending on the team. It's a different situation. I know that it's obviously NBA is a capped league, and
Yeah,
you can only spend so much. But they could also like, I guess with the apron stuff, I am not as well versed as
yeah.
you
You
are in
could
that.
jump
But
above. first
but like,
aprons
yeah, but
and yeah.
there's certain things you could like sort of work around with some finesse or whatever. But just before I get into that, I just want to point the Magic tweet was funny because I enjoyed how he spun it into. Of course, he's like once I saw the Celtics sell for $6 billion, I knew the Lakers are going to sell for $10 billion. I was like, that's magic. What a world class tweeter. He's a poster.
Look, it's worth it to him to leave the Lakers to tweet if you can send out tweets like that.
Yeah, no question. So yeah, you mentioned. I agree with you. That's like the biggest. Obviously, spending on the talent, the players, etc., is great and necessary. But where you can really have an advantage is like just overwhelming on the other stuff, right? Having the best of the best of scouting, of
Analytics, video,
league
medical.
intel, like yeah, exactly, like everything. Like I'll give you an example. So the Dodgers, like obviously they're coming off winning the World Series. They won 2 in the last 5 years. They're also a punchline in that they have 74 pitchers on the injured list at all times. Part of that is like a self-selection thing where they will target injured pitchers, and pitchers actually want to come to them knowing that if they do get hurt or maybe they're dealing with something, that the Dodgers are the best at like guiding them through the process of that.
Yeah.
So it's like a weird situation of like as we're speaking, Emmett Sheehan pitched Wednesday night. Him coming off the injured list meant they only have 13 pitchers on the injured list at the moment. So so they're doing good. But you know what I mean? Like that said, they like because of how they've invested, they have a system to where it's manageable, right?
Yeah, guys can
Because of
take their time
yeah,
coming back. It's not you're not sitting here because it is wild every so often, and I feel like you see these graphics every other week or so where Dodgers pitchers that are on
yeah,
the injured list, and it's like 3 of the best rotations you will ever
yeah,
see.
yeah,
And yet, because the Dodgers are so deep and because they've essentially planned for that, none of those pitchers who are on that injured list ever feel the need to like hurry up and get back as too fast. Everybody wants to be back as soon as they can in a safe manner. But oftentimes, like if you're the starting pitcher, if you're the ace of a group where there isn't that kind of organizational depth and you miss time, it's felt throughout the fan base. There's that inherent pressure. And because the Dodgers basically kind of plan for it, they use their extra resources to go out and get enough guys that if one of their guys misses time, it's just like, you know what? I do still have to take my time. I do still have to come back. And whenever I do come back, I want to make sure I'm at as close to 100% that I possibly can. And that's a real advantage.
yeah. And an example of that I would say is like essentially Clayton Kershaw's prime. He was far and away like the best pitcher in baseball, but also they didn't have a fully built up team around him all those years.
Yeah.
So they would rely on him to pitch
Perfect.
deeper than he probably should have, and had maybe a less competent bullpen behind him. And so like if he didn't like come through, and oftentimes he didn't because he was pushed so hard or he pushed himself so hard or whatever, that there was nothing left behind that. So the best thing this
That's where
group,
that playoff reputation came from.
Yeah.
Is he had to be
Yeah.
not just Clayton Kershaw, you had to be the best pitcher ever every start and for longer than you probably should have been.
Yeah. And so the best thing this ownership group I think did was they always call it, or Andrew Friedman at least mentioned this. We want to build a team. I don't remember if he said the word worthy of him, but like basically of that level. But what basically was is building a team where you're not 100% reliant on having to have your number one guy be 100%. Like and so like it's
they're not gonna be.
Yeah, having Clayton Kershaw as like an ancillary guy, these days for sure. But like even though like in 2020, he was their number 2 starter, and he won both World Series starts that year. But like they didn't have to have him do that like to win,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so just sort of building that everything up around him was like one of the keys to how they've sort of ascended.
Yeah, I want to spend some time on the investment into the organization and some of the advantages that they can create. And I'm recalling my own timeline from my brief times covering the Dodgers, but when I was there, it was kind of sort of in that transition period. Coletti, I believe, was gone, but I remember they brought in obviously Caston and then
Mm-hmm.
obviously Friedman, but they also at that time had Farhan Zaidi and they had Alex Anthopoulos. Anthopoulos went on to build this Braves team that has been
Mm-hmm.
stellar for the last out of 3, 4, 5 years or so.
Yep.
And it was this I would have loved to just sit in that room and listen to those guys talk baseball, because there was no, like, Friedman doesn't ever strike me as somebody who is threatened by somebody potentially having a better idea than him. Caston, I feel like, is operates very much the same way, and I think they have had. I think they brought back Zaidi, didn't they? Is he back in the organization?
Yeah, and so his role now, because he was with the Giants, he ran the Giants for a while, and then got fired last year. He's back with the Dodgers, but he's like has a hybrid role,
Yeah.
partially Dodgers. He's also so the funny part, I think it's pretty vague. I think he may have talked with Susan Slusser at the San Francisco Chronicle over the weekend about it, but like he's also helping the ownership group with their other investments. And little did we know that they were about to add one. Like, so who knows what his involvement is in that? But like,
Yeah.
but you're right though about the surrounding yourself, Friedman, with like other talented people. And so to that point, I just want to. I remember I was around. So Friedman was hired in before the 2015 season, so it was like November 14, and Zaidi as well. Like they were hired, lockstep. Oh, not within days of each other. And there was a
Yeah.
joint sort of get together at Dodger Stadium in one of the conference rooms, and it's so how far baseball like media has come, and just baseball in general. So many of the questions in that little conference was like, okay, but what if another team calls and like, wait, who answers? Because you're a GM and you're like, there was like such confusion. Like it was, I
Yeah.
was like, I was sitting there like, what are we doing? Like, what, and so that like
Yeah.
that always struck me as hilarious because like now there's like even like the smaller front offices have like probably a hierarchy of like 3 or 4 people at
Yeah.
least, and even they also had during that time, I think when you were around too, Josh Burns,
Mhm.
who was a
I
GM
remember that. Yeah.
previously, and but like you said, they just like having a lot of people to throw around ideas, and some of those ideas end up being great, and like you just sort of work it through and sort of figure it out, and they're very good at like collaborating. I think both within their group and like the organization as a whole as well.
And some of this is my own kind of confirmation bias, because that's how I prefer to work.
Yeah.
I prefer to work in a team. I've never really been challenged about. I've never thought I would ever be the smartest person in the room, so I just kind of accept that as a reality. And if somebody has a better idea than me, it's like, cool, all right, let's build on that idea. And that is not how the Lakers have operated. Rob Pelinka has the thinnest front office in the sport. They don't have a pro scouting department. Their analytics department is really thin. Their video department is really thin. Their medical team and their medical staff is really thin. And I think that has led to a very insulated organization. And that's one of the things that I think there are already reports out there that Mark Walter is already looking to bolster the front office. And it's going to be really interesting to see how he does that with Rob Pelinka, who has been able to basically operate unchecked in the front office. And it's going to be fascinating to watch, if they do bring more people into the front office, how that goes, how those conversations internally take place. But the other comparison that I wanted to make, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I was there when they were um, working to eventually hire Dave Roberts,
Hmm.
and that managerial search was, how many people did they consider? It was like 15.
Yeah,
Yeah, it might have been even
I think
more.
at least that many, maybe as far as up to 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you compare it to the way that, hiring JJ Redick this most recent time went, where right from the get-go he was kind of sort of the name du jour. He was the one that they kind of chose right from the onset of that coaching search. um I guess my question for you is, with the way that Guggenheim is operated, and there being such a clear clash of organizational cultures here, where one is this extremely walled off culture and the other one is this extremely kind of welcoming environment to ideas. How do you think Guggenheim would handle that moment where they're like, no, 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 we think this is best, and then Genie is going to be like, yeah, but I'm governor, so what now? It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, no, and just before I answer, I had heard that Dan Hurley was about to. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to get it. So, uh,
He's
the,
actually off camera. Do you want me to bring him on?
yeah, Woj, is that no? Um, yeah. So I think the it, I it's gonna the transition might take a couple years, because when Guggenheim bought the team, it became official, I think, May 1st, 2012. So baseball season had already started, and they didn't hire Friedman until at the end of the 2014 season. And it
Yeah.
was a little bumpy. Like Ned Coletti was around still as GM. Don Mattingly was manager in so
Yeah.
12 and 13,
And they were like
and
a playoff ish team, you
yeah,
know?
and so um, they were like doing stuff in the background, but and I think like you know that that trade with the Red Sox in 2012 was they took on a bunch of salary. It was like 250 million, unheard of at the time,
Yep.
essentially to get Adrian Gonzalez. Like
Yeah.
because but they all obviously got Carl Crawford was useful for like a couple years. Josh Beckett threw a no hitter for him, so it wasn't just that, but like it was more of an establishing credibility sort of move than action, maybe total on field
Yeah.
stuff. But it was that sort of that was like ownership driven. So it was like Coletti was GM, but like they were doing a lot of stuff like around him as well, and then so it might take a little bit with that
Makes sense.
in terms of that, but I think once they sort of lock in and find the the leader of the front office, and maybe they determine that it is Palenka, right? But like he's going to have to be open to a larger, because I think that's what they're going to try to do. Like you said, they're going to bring in multiple people, like just sort of have as many uh, avenues at their disposal to analyze, to to bounce off ideas, to just sort of make sure that like everything is working. And so yeah, like I don't know how that's going to play out. Like I'm not, I guess I'm not familiar with like NBA front offices compared to baseball, but like I've heard you talk about how their scouting department, like you mentioned, is minimal to none, or some of their like evaluation of other teams, just generally. I think that part is probably the easiest immediate fix, like
Yeah.
because you're not necessarily challenging Palinka's authority. You're just giving him more tools at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's a great point, actually. Yeah.
that's going to be the key, I think, just generally with how this sort of transition goes.
Yeah. I like that idea of starting by supplementing.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like what football teams will do with a young quarterback, where like the Miami Dolphins with Tua, right? They gave him every single, they gave him really good wide receivers. They gave him a good running back core. They gave him a pretty good offensive line finally. And they were like, all right, sink or swim. You're either going to be really good or you're not. And at least at the end of that process, we'll have an understanding of what you are capable of as a quarterback. And I think that's essentially, I think that's a pretty good prediction of how the Lakers might approach this transitional or potential transitional period with Rob Pelinka and the rest of the front office, where it's like, all right, here's what you guys have accomplished without all of these tools. Let's see what you can do with them. You know, it's like I always use this comparison, but when I was a kid, I was pretty good in school. I'm a relatively smart guy, and I would come home and I would have a test, and I would say to my dad, "Yeah, I got like I got like a 83, and I didn't even study." And he was like, "Moron, what would you do if you studied? You know, how do you think that goes if you study?" And I kind of feel like it's a version of that conversation, not where Mark Walter calls Rob Pelinka a moron or anything like that, but where it's like, yeah, you won a championship in 2019, 2020. You made a Western Conference final a couple of years ago. You land Luka Doncic, just last season. There are good things that y'all have accomplished without all of these tools. Let's see if we can supplement the things that you have done with some of these tools to raise that floor, so that the gap between what you're capable of at your highest highs and the gap between what you're capable of at your lowest lows, that lowest low isn't letting Alex Caruso walk for nothing so that he could become an all-world defender the very next year. That's a really, I think that's the best kind of prediction of how this is at least going to go early on. I wanted to talk to you about also, some of the more controversial moves that the Dodgers have made,
Sure.
while Guggenheim has been at the helm, or while Friedman and everybody have been at the helm. That you lose Corey Seager, not you, but the Dodgers lose Corey Seager. The Dodgers just lost Walker Buehler. He just walked to Boston. Like they do. Trey Turner was another guy. Manny Machado was another guy that they have lost. They do tend to kind of churn through some of their talent, specifically for some reason at shortstop. But how, like, could you just try to maybe explain the process that you think goes into some of that as something that maybe Lakers fans might need to watch for as well?
Yeah, so it is sort of weird. Like they've been very good at like pouncing on, when like Hall of Fame level talent becomes available, like the Mookie Betts trade.
Shohei.
Freddie Freeman, the Braves not coming to a deal with him. They're like, hey, guess what? Why don't you sign here? Like,
Yeah.
and then they sort of pounce on that. The other stuff is like Seager could very well end up in the Hall of Fame eventually, but I think in some of these cases, I can't say specifically for Seager, but like, it also maybe takes two to tango, and I'm not sure
Oh, that's fair.
if they felt they just weren't going to sign him, or that he wasn't going to sign with them. I don't think maybe I'm sure they had discussions, but nothing formal. I know specifically with Trey Turner, same thing, discussions, never a formal offer. But I think by that point, I think both sides kind of knew where they stood.
Yeah,
But
I know he wanted to be on the East Coast.
yeah, that was a little bit overblown, I
Okay.
think. But part of that's related to, so with Seager, when he was going to be gone after 2021, then when they traded for Max Scherzer and Turner in 21, knowing they had another year of Turner, that was sort of a buffer of losing Seager if they lost Seager, and which they did, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And like both of those guys signed $300 million deals, so it's like I get it, right? Like whatever.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
So that's like part of it. Bueller is a weird case because homegrown. Seager was also homegrown, but like what a well, they were in New York, but literal Hollywood ending last year. He was so bad, like coming off of his second Tommy John.
Yeah.
You could argue damaged goods or whatever. Found his fastball at the perfect time in October, and like
Yeah.
and just like all of a sudden shoved, and like had the signature moment, and then so we talked about how they have so many pitchers on the injured list, right? Part of it was I think they sort of targeted they were going to go high end. They obviously signed Blake Snell, who has to this point made 2 starts in the first year of his 5-year deal.
Yeah.
But I think they were going higher end there. I think their sort of strategy on some of this pitcher wise, try to get as many like ultra high end talent, knowing when they're on the field, you're going to probably have a great pitcher. We just don't know how often they could stay on the field,
Yeah.
sort of a thing. And I think they already had Tyler Glass now, similar situation, and a lot of their pitchers were coming back. Like Kershaw came back in May. Tony Gonsolin took until the end of April. Dustin May was coming back from surgery, so they had all these guys like coming. Emmett Sheehan just came back this week. All these sort of guys lined up at some point to be ready, and I think they were sort of targeting like maybe more of a flexible. They didn't want to like lock in necessarily. And with Bueller too, like it would have been one thing if he like just had a normal year and he was a normal free agent. You could just sign him to whatever.
Yeah.
But Bueller's looking for like a 1-year like prove it deal, and then going out and like establishing a free agency case again so he can actually sign like a long-term contract. And I just don't think they were probably the place for that to happen.
Yeah.
That was specific to him. But you're right though. I just think they're targeted like for years before they signed Ohtani. I was like hesitant. Like I just didn't think it was never like a done deal, but everyone's like, oh, they're just saving up for Ohtani. They're saving up for Ohtani. It's like, yeah, but what if they don't get Ohtani, right? Like it was not like
right.
It was not like that.
Yeah.
Obvious.
I remember I was sitting here freaking out.
But it's just like, man, they hit literal home runs by targeting Mookie Betts, immediately signing him to a 12-year extension. They signed Freddie Freeman for 6 years. He's going into the Hall of Fame, clearly. And then Shohei Ohtani is probably the greatest player ever. And like he's been great for them at this point, pitching only 1 inning, right? Like it's just like just imagine when that gets going. So
he was
like
an MVP last year without pitching. Yeah.
Oh, and then they also signed in the same right after they signed Ohtani, the Yoshinobu Yamamoto to the largest pitching contract ever. That was another like kind of shrewd move. Like obviously huge deal, huge risk, but they're signing that guy at age 25, right?
Yeah.
And whereas most free agents are like 31 or whatever,
yeah.
And so obviously they're not getting a 12-year deal, but you're sort of they do a decent job of like managing that sort of risk too. No, they still spend money on older guys in some cases, but it's it is I don't know. It doesn't always work out. Like not everyone's gonna stay. And the other thing, like Cody Bellinger, we talk about ups and downs, man.
Yeah,
he sort of redefined for me like what a ceiling and a floor could be for a player. So it's like like MVP,
in that he literally hit both.
Yeah, exactly. And then they just didn't know what they were going to get. So like he was a year before free agency, but because of the way arbitration works in baseball, it's such a weird system. It's like based on comps in the year before, and he was already elevated because he won MVP so early. So he's coming off these like super high pay raises, and they're like, nah, I think we're good. They just let him go. Like, and then he's been good like since he left, but not like great. MVP. But yeah. But it's just like that's just like one of those weird situations where you just don't know.
But I guess the reason I ask is because one of the things that the Lakers are kind of running into now is like Rob Pelinka has his wins, and it takes more for Rob Pelinka to come off of his wins than it does some of the previous organization regiments. What word am I thinking there? Anyway, but the last, the Jim Buss wins, right? Alex Caruso was more of a Jim Buss win than he was a Rob Pelinka win, and Alex was kind of shown the door pretty unceremoniously. And the reason I ask about some of the guys that the Dodgers have let walk or seen walk, I think there's a big difference to be made there. But they are very, I think, honest about their talent, whether it's homegrown or not. It's, I wouldn't use cold is the word. I
Yeah.
think they do genuinely care about, the players as guys. And you look at how kind of close that team is right now, right? Where they throw sunflower seeds at each other every time they hit a homer, and they always have some silly thing. Kike Hernandez, right, has been in the organization for a long time. Chris Taylor was there for a long time. Austin Barnes was there for a long time. They have those examples as well. But I think at the end of the day, the Dodgers are um, always calculating, what a player is currently, what that player could eventually be, in a way that I think there might be a bit of a shock to the system, to Lakers fans initially on that front.
No, for sure. Uh, Part of this too, like you mentioned, Chris Taylor, Austin Barnes, they were guys who were um, early Friedman, Andrew Friedman regime.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the word I was
oh
thinking of.
yeah, you know what? Even when you said it, I couldn't think of
Regiment,
it, and
that's
it
not
just came
it.
to me like right now. I was like, all right, uh,
No, you're just rubbing it in. You're like,
yeah, that's right.
watch this.
So those guys were like unheralded acquisitions who like became good. Chris Taylor was like in the middle of like a swing change that would alter his career.
Yeah.
Similar, it wasn't a Friedman acquisition, but Justin Turner signing a minor league deal right as he was like basically embracing launch angle as his thing, and then just rode that into like 12 more years
Yeah.
of a productive, or 10 more years or whatever. And uh, Austin Barnes was a part. They traded extremely popular D Gordon away, who ended
Mhm.
up getting popped for PEDs like his second year
I
in
remember that.
Miami.
Yeah.
But that was there was like a wild first. I would say the first winter meetings, or the first off season of Friedman and Zaidi, they were busy, man. They got to work. So like whenever that happens, like look out, because things get. Yeah, I know obviously basketball is a little different, but like just that turnover was wild. But so it was unheralded stuff. Like they traded Matt Kemp, and they're like, how could they trade Matt Kemp for Yasmani Grandal? And then like Kemp like cratered, and Grandal was like a productive catcher for a
Mhm.
good. But Barnes was a throw in. Kike Hernandez, or not throw in, but Kike Hernandez, Austin Barnes were part of that deal, and they've been here. And Austin Barnes like parlayed that into multiple like extensions. He didn't get like super paid, but like got paid a decent amount for basically being a backup catcher for 11 years.
Yeah.
Chris Taylor got a good free agent contract, 4 years, 60 million. He's not been good for like the last 2-ish years. Barnes struggled a little bit, but obviously they value what they brought like in the room, as they say,
Yeah.
in addition to whatever the production was. But like they even like said they
Both solid
last month,
defensively, play multiple positions too. I think that helped.
yeah, but last month they did finally make that like hard decision within a couple days of each other to cut both of them loose.
Yeah.
And they talked about how hard it was. Like obviously from a baseball standpoint, it doesn't take a lot to like justify that decision. It was pretty clear what needed to happen, but it still doesn't make it any easier. And they are willing to do that, but I think they've been relatively open. And I think part of that took some time. Early they were early on under the Friedman regime. They had a few like guys they would kind of cycle through, and some guys weren't used to that. Now, part of this is like that can feel a little bit disposable in a way, like a player can.
Mhm.
Just the way like, oh, this guy's going to be an up and down guy. Like we're going to go in recent collective bargaining agreements, you can only option a guy to the minors 5 times within one season. But it used to be like Mitch White used to be a pitcher for the
I remember
Dodgers.
that. Yeah.
He 1 year he was optioned 11 times during the season because there was
Became the
no,
Mitch White rule. Yeah.
yeah, there was no limit, right? So it was just insane. But yeah, so they are, yeah, they definitely will make like the hard decision, but they'll also like value the other stuff. Like Miguel Rojas has sort of stuck around the
Yeah.
last few years as the sort of extra guy. Last year, he like had I think his best year of his career. So it's just they kind of they're trying to like it's like a balance of both, right? Like that's sort of the ideal part of it.
Yeah. And that's honestly what I'm most kind of excited for. You mentioned how Rojas had the best year of his career. You mentioned how Chris Taylor found his swing and extended his career. Justin Turner I think we'll probably eventually have his jersey retired by the Dodgers, right? And it'll be close, right? He has to make the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
They have like a similar rule.
yeah, they're it's not official, but basically yes, they waived it thankfully for Fernando
Nando.
Valenzuela, who like obviously meant more to the fan base than just about anyone. But he's one of the like they have like the next tier down of the legends of Dodger baseball, where you get like you still get like a plaque in an area at Dodger Stadium.
Mhm.
Justin Turner's going to be in that, I
Yeah.
think, no question. Yeah.
But I mentioned all of that to say, you know, that's another thing that, or another reason that guys kind of flock to the Dodgers. That they know that if they get there, whatever talent is left to be squeezed from that stone is they're going to do everything they can to get that out of them. And that's really valuable, and to be known as the organization that does that. If the Lakers again can eventually develop that reputation,
Mm-hmm.
as well as their ability to attract superstars, then then you start looking at some truly special opportunities there. But Eric, this has been an absolute blast talking about, I think what is truly a thrilling development for the Lakers. If there's anything, to kind of, final message here, before obviously we get to you plugging the work that you do with True Blue LA. But if there was like a final message, anything that you don't want to leave unsaid, talking about Guggenheim, is what do you think that would be?
So this is going to be one of those like sort of in a funny way, like a great thing to have to complain about. But there was like a running joke, like when the Dodgers won the World Series in 2020, it was their first World Series in 32 years, and it's always weird in sports where like the owner gets the trophy first, and then like they speak, and I swear it felt like Mark Walter's speech lasted forever, and like honestly, if that's the main complaint about like your owner, so weirdly
He,
with him, he is like around, but he's kind of hands off in a way. Like he kind of
yeah,
lets people do what they're going to do. Obviously, like their payroll counting the luxury tax this year is going to be over 500 million, well over 500 million, right? It's going to be like shatter whatever record. So like he has to like approve that, but
yeah,
he's not Steinbrenner like calling on in from the press box to the dugout, be like take this guy out, that kind of thing.
yeah.
So it's almost like like you're right. I share your like sort of excitement in that regard regarding the Lakers, because like yeah, like if he can do anything close or find the basketball equivalent of that, he's gonna probably do what it takes to like get that done.
That's what, the people who I spoke to for today's piece on clutch points, they all said pretty unanimously was like, we always kind of took for granted that the Lakers were going to leave some of that meat on the bone, and that is not what Mark Walter is known for in his time owning the Dodgers. So it's very exciting. So yeah, plug away. What True Blue LA is where your work can be found. Anything else beyond that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I have a podcast, the 3 Inning Save. I'm on Blue Sky, Eric Steven, full name. Yeah, that's about it. But thanks for having me on.
Anytime, man. Especially more now that we have this kind of connection. I'm looking forward to what this means in that regard as well. But yeah, this, like I said, we recorded this yesterday. This is airing on a Friday afternoon. So enjoy the rest of your weekend. Uh, do so safely. Have a great rest of it. Make somebody else's, and I will talk to you. I don't even know. It might be 15 minutes from now because some other crazy thing just happened. But just in case, have a good one, everybody, and thank you very much, Eric.